This episode is brought to you by Peloton. Break through the busiest time of year with the brand new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus. Powered by Peloton IQ. With real-time guidance and endless ways to move, you can personalize your workouts and train with confidence, helping you reach your goals in less time. Let yourself run, lift, sculpt, push, and go. Explore the new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus at onepeloton.com.
Hi, and welcome to Kay Let's Talk, the podcast where we break down storytelling across books, television, and film with a special love for book-to-screen adaptations. Here, we talk about craft, character arcs, structure, dialogue, visual language, and the creative choices that shape how a story lands. If you like thoughtful conversational deep dives into the stories you can't stop thinking about, you're in the right place. Let's talk. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. On this week's episode, we are going to be breaking down Season 8, Episode 2, talking all things book to screen, how it compares to the source material, some of the creative choices made to showcase the emotionality of scenes, and as always, there will be spoilers for the books and likely story beats that can happen later on this season. So if you are looking to avoid those, you have been warned. This episode is directed by Caitriona Balfe, and I personally thought it was a really great introduction to her directing style, and the pacing of this episode felt really appropriate after what I felt was a little bit of a choppy episode 1. We open the episode with this title card stating that we're back in time in London in 1775. And we start with this flashback where we see Ben, Henry, and William Gray all together, and Ben gets his reports to go to Boston with General Howe. This flashback serves the narrative purpose of reintroducing us to Henry, who we've already met, and introducing us to Ben, who we've seen mentioned already in episode 1 of season 8. It's also meant to show us that William considers both Ben and Henry brothers of his, and having us see how close they were helps to better frame the journey that he goes on to discover what has happened to his cousin. Within this scene, we see William present Ben with a miniature General Rollin, which is a keepsake to keep him safe, because for William, he states that that general has never lost a battle, and it's meant to guard him on his new mission to Boston. The visual callback and narrative callback that we see play out later on is when Ben tucks this keepsake, the miniature, into his uniform. And that's something that we will see later on in the episode when William goes after Ben to find more information about him at the American camp. It's a very quick, succinct, and effective scene that, again, establishes largely what William's storyline will be, but also reintroduces characters to us that have not been on our screens for some time or have been referred to only in the show so far. And the way that it is shot, again, is very creative so that the color grading reflects this being a memory or a moment that is taking place in the past. Then we get the title card for the episode, and we can see that the episode title is Prophecies, and we see a bear eating blueberries, which is foreshadowing to the Amy Higgins storyline from the book. And then we also get to see Caitriona Balfe's name as the director. We then get another title card saying that we are back in North Carolina in 1779. And this opens with Fanny looking at bacteria under the microscope with Claire, and Claire is more or less giving her a science lesson. And this takes place in chapter 26 in the book, Go and Tell the Bees That I'm Gone. I had said in my review of episode 1 that they had seemed to kind of dull down Fanny's knowledge from the brothel, but here we can see that they are giving her more of that outspokenness that's in line with her characterization in the book. And they have her be more candid about her time in the brothel with Claire, and states that she wishes that Jane were with them there because Jane liked science but was forbid to practice it. But the men at the brothel seemed to appreciate her strangeness. Claire, for her part, is very good about dealing with Fanny's more outspoken nature, and it's used as a humorous story beat as well. But I also really enjoyed the scene where Claire pulls Fanny aside and tells her that they've both seen terrible things, and Claire won't be shocked by anything Fanny chooses to tell her. and she reassures her that she can tell her or Jamie or Bree or Roger anything at any time, but some people on the ridge won't understand it in the same way, and they might be shocked if she had told them about how she used to live. Claire doesn't want people on the ridge to make assumptions of Fanny, and she knows that they are going to try and protect her from that life as best they can, and she can talk to them about Jane whenever she wants to, but Jane was also trying to protect Fanny from that life, and so they want her to stay safe, and Claire and Jamie will keep her safe always, and I think this conversation is really impactful for Fanny to hear firsthand. I also liked this scene because it felt like more of a return to the source material where Claire's motivations for keeping Fanny safe are less so about her thinking she may be her granddaughter and more fall in line with their sense of duty and honor to Jane and also William's request to Jamie that they protect Fanny. We then cut to Jamie and Roger in the woods sawing a piece of wood, and this is the conversation I had hoped we would get, which is Roger filling Jamie in about what happened in the future that led him and Bree and the kids to travel back in time. It is a largely condensed version of the conversation, though, and we hear Roger talking about Buck Mackenzie. Roger defends Buck and says that he can forgive a man who made a mistake when he believes they were doing something right, and admits that he loves Buck for being family alone. In the book, a lot of this conversation between Roger and Jamie is spurred from Roger's fear of Jenny finding out that Roger is there, because when Roger went back in time, he met a younger version of Jenny. In the book, Jenny had come back to America with them, and Roger was afraid she'd recognize him and figure out that he was a time traveler. So that is omitted from the show version. What we get instead is Jamie asking Roger for advice on Frank's book and the battle that he is writing about. Frank had listed men named John Sevier, Benjamin Cleveland, and Isaac Shelby, and Roger admits he doesn't know those names from history, but admits that that's because he did not study the Revolutionary War or North Carolina specifically. We learn that at this point in the story, Jamie doesn't know any of those men either, but notes that if Frank knew who Jamie was, he didn't have any reason to love him. Roger then offers to read the book himself, and Jamie tells him maybe once I'm finished. So he is actively choosing to hide his knowledge from Roger at this point. That is when Captain Cunningham arrives after he was summoned by Jamie, and we learn that Roger has already spoken to Cunningham. Jamie is able to confirm that Cunningham is a Freemason and tells him that they are hoping to organize a meeting on the Ridge every fortnight. And when Cunningham agrees that he is a Freemason that would like to attend, he offers to help them with the wood. Cunningham as a character is one that I really hoped they would cast someone who could capture his snakiness, and I'm thrilled with this casting. I think this actor is doing such a phenomenal job, but I also really love how Jamie in particular acts opposite him. They're really capturing the unease between the two of them, and it's building and building and building, and I know it's going to have a really phenomenal payoff. Then we travel back to Philadelphia, where we get to see Henry marry Mercy Woodcock. So again, the use of that flashback scene at the top of the episode helps us to recognize the actor in this scene here. And we get to also see that both William and Denzel Hunter are in attendance for the wedding. Mercy mentions Mr. Bryant's bill, which would allow for interracial marriages such as theirs to take place in the colonies. And William makes a very kind speech as the only gray in attendance. And I thought this was a really great moment that reinforces just how much William is loyal and loving of his cousins, and also is a forward-thinking person like Jamie. I think William, for the most part, can be very stubborn, and his upbringing informs a lot of his worldview, but in this season, I think we're going to see a lot more of Jamie come out of him, and even though he makes some misguided decisions, I do believe that this season gives a lot of leeway for us to see more of his Jamie Fraser side. Henry, though, since he knows him so well, can tell that something's going on with William, and so when they step away from the crowd, William tells Henry that Ben is dead. Much of William's storyline in this book surrounds this Ben subplot, but also stuff going on with Lord John Grey. So kicking it off in episode 2 is encouraging for me because I think they're going to have to condense it quite a bit in order to fit it all into the 10 episodes of this season. But William tells Henry that he will go and discover what has happened for Amaranthus and Trevor's sakes, and Henry encourages him to go as well. And William deeply apologizes to him for being the one who has to tell him the news. I'll be very curious if we see Henry in any capacity in the rest of the season. I hope that we do, and that they are able to kind of bring a full circle resolution to this subplot that we get with Ben. Judging by the pace of how everything's going, I do think we will, which is a good thing. And that's when we leave the Philadelphia storyline and William to go up to New Jersey, and we head back to the Ridge where we see the kids playing in the woods and hear them laughing. And then we get a close-up on the berries. So instantly, if you are a book reader, you can tell what this scene is going to be with Amy Higgins and all of the women who are out in the woods picking berries together. And that includes Rachel, Amy, Lizzie, and Bree. This scene was one that actually made me tear up when I was reading the book, so I was very curious how they were going to shoot it and the way that it was going to be framed and contextualized, and I was actually quite happy with how they did it in the show. So in the woods, after we see the kids laughing, we drop into the conversation between Rachel, Amy, Lizzie, and Bree. And Amy reminds the viewers how she came to the Ridge with 2 bairns as a widow. The character of Amy in the show version of Outlander hasn't been fully fleshed out as much as she is in the books, and the biggest thing to note is that Bree and Roger are extremely close to her in the source material, and also with her husband in the source material, who is a different man named Bobby Higgins. The show has written Bobby out and has her marrying Evan Lindsay instead, but they are trying to bring us up to speed with the fact that this is the same woman we saw interacting with Roger when she was mourning the loss of her husband who had passed and trying her best to raise her 2 sons when she arrives at Fraser's Ridge. My fear when awaiting this scene was that people were not going to be as invested in Amy as book readers were, because again, we spend a lot of time with Amy and her family and Roger and Bree in the source material, and we don't get that build up in the show. But I do think that this scene was fairly impactful regardless of how much backstory was given to Amy in the show, because no matter how you slice it, this is a really traumatic moment in the story for everyone else who is present for this really horrific moment. And the way it plays out in the show is fairly close to how it works in the book. And mainly it's that Amy is separated from the rest of the group. Here she's complaining of ants and moves up the hill. And we get to see the baby kicking, with Lizzie having her commentary about her funny story of her delivery, and Bree telling Rachel not to get her hopes up for an easy delivery. And all of that happens while Amy is sitting up higher on the hill. This camera angle to me is a really effective one at pointing out to us that something ominous is going to happen, because we are looking up at her. And that's not a camera angle that we often see in Outlander unless we are trying to get really close and up close within the personal space of the character we're looking at. And that's when we cut to this faraway shot where we can see the bear running towards her from a distance. And again, they have to work with CGI here, so the way that they're going to block this is going to try and limit the amount of CGI that we see. And so I do think they did something clever here when they actually warp the camera lens to make it seem like we are looking through the eyes of the bear running towards Amy in her spot on the hill. Thankfully, everything else that happens is not shown on screen. It's very quick. We hear the aftermath of it and the screaming. And that is a really, I think, effective way of showcasing how quick moving everything else happens in the aftermath of this, because it wouldn't be as effective if we saw Bree collecting the kids and moving them out of the way into a safe place and then going back to the house to retrieve help, and then Jamie coming to help carry Amy. All of that doesn't have to be shown for the effectiveness of the scene to be conveyed and felt and palpable. And that's kudos to Caitriona, because instead she chooses to do 2 up-close shots, both on Bree, who's watching this happen from a distance. And then as we hear her fire her rifle, we get the same up-close shot on Jamie, who hears it and starts running towards it. And then very quickly, we're back at the Ridge in Claire's surgery, and we can see Amy being brought into the surgery by Jamie, and we can already tell that something is terribly wrong. The prosthetics in this scene were phenomenal, because I definitely got squeamish looking at it all. And we can tell that Amy's face has been mauled by the bear, but more importantly, Claire can see that her artery has been severed, and she knows that she won't be able to save her. And she warns Jamie, because Amy's family and her boys arrive, and Claire wants to just have her hold on as long as she can so that her sons and her husband can say goodbye to her. Again, we get this camera angle where we're looking up, and we have up closes on both Jamie and Claire's faces. So again, foreshadowing that something bad is going to happen when we get this sort of camera angle. So that continuity is really important in establishing the tone. And we've been in this scenario with Claire and Jamie before, where Jamie can understand Claire's body language and her facial expressions, and he knows, without her having to say, what her diagnosis is and her prognosis on the situation. And so Jamie then knows that his role is to go and tell everybody what they need to hear. Outside, when the boys arrive, Bree is trying to comfort them, and she doesn't want them to see their mother because she knows how horrific she looks. But Evan, Lindsay, arrives and says that they deserve to say goodbye to her. And so the boys are allowed into the room and are ushered in by Roger. And this is our first glimpse into just how spooked Bree is from this event. And a lot of that is aided not only with her facial expression, but in the lighting. We can see that everything behind her is black and the light is only shining on her face, but it's a harsh light, so there's a lot of shadows cast on her as well. Then we get this up-close shot of her hands and the blood on them, and that's something that's taken from the opening credits of the show as well. In the book, all of this is happening at the same exact time that Claire is talking to Fanny about mucus in her stomach and the opening scene of the episode. They're happening in tandem in chapter 26 of Go and Tell the Bees That I Am Gone. And the shock that Brianna experiences from Amy's death is something that I think will probably be drawn out over the course of the season, because she struggles with it deeply in the book. We get the scene where Evan and the boys go in and see Amy. They ask if there's anything else Claire can do, and she reassures them that she can't do anything to save her. And so Evan and the boys are able to say goodbye and hold her face, and Evan promises her that he will take care of her sons for her. He asks Roger if he will say a prayer for her, and we see that play out on screen as well. Again, I didn't know how they were going to film this moment, or if they were even going to venture to film this moment, but I thought they did a really effective and beautiful job of not only the timing and pacing of it, but the placement of it in the episode too. It felt like a really great positioning for it to fall in the episode, because the after effects of it do drag out for the remainder of the episode. So we can see the after effects with Rachel, who is being comforted by Ian. She tells him how Amy had been attacked by a bear, and all of a sudden she was gone, and it could have been any one of them. And it scared them all so deeply that it happened so quick, and it wasn't something that they could have prevented, and it could have been any number of them. This is a show change, because in the book, it's just Amy, Brianna, and the children that go out hunting for wild berries. And so having them include these other characters adds another layer to the scene, especially when we see Jamie come out of the big house and announce to all of them that Amy did not make it. When we leave that scene, we cut to William arriving on horseback at the camp looking for a captain to speak to, because he doesn't have much information about Benjamin, and Will wants to be able to give Trevor more information about his father. We see that William's not going to be able to get any more information, but then cleverly asks if Ben had left anything behind. And the captain says he'll ask around and see if anyone has any of his belongings. And William then asks to be shown his grave. When we cut back to the big house, Claire is tending to Amy, and we see Bree come in, and she tells Claire what had happened, and you can tell instantly that she just needs the comfort of her mother. She explains to Claire she had her rifle on her, but it all happened so fast, and she's clearly in shock and is going to get ready for the hunt for the bear to try and distract herself. Claire can tell that Brianna needs that distraction in order to not dwell on this and make it feel like it was her fault. And I think the characterization of Brianna is so different in the show that a lot of the acting choices and dialogue choices for Brie have to now align with the show version of Brie rather than the book version of Brie. And I do think that this reaction feels more natural for the show version of Brie because the book version of Brie is so much more of a tough warrior type figure. And this Brianna for the show is much softer. And so her feeling this overwhelm is very true to character, in my opinion. And she does in the book as well, but it feels more out of character that she would be so deeply affected because she does come across as much more stoic in the books at times, or at least harder on the surface, more akin to Jamie. When she leaves, Claire begins to cut Amy's clothes off, and that is when Mrs. Cunningham comes in to help her tend to the body and prepare her for burial. And we get this really funny, clever scene where she just jumps into action, and Claire is quite confused by this. The arrival of Mrs. Cunningham comes as a surprise to Claire in both the book and the TV show, and the whole scene with Amy Higgins actually takes place further into the book than the show is having it positioned, which is earlier on in the season. This takes place in chapter 27 in the book. And I really like the way that they've casted Mrs. Cunningham because she's exactly how she's described in the source material. In the book, when she arrives at Claire's surgery, Claire thinks to herself that there is a tall black figure of Mrs. Cunningham, bony and stern as the Grim Reaper, with a folded cloth over one arm. She hovered awkwardly in the threshold, and I just as awkwardly motioned her in. Anytime you get a book to screen adaptation, the interpretation of a scene is going to be different depending on the director and the writing, and this is one of the few where it plays out really exactly how I envisioned it in my head while reading. Outside, we can see everyone who is preparing to hunt the bear, and Jamie decides to invite the boys because they can avenge their mother. And the conversation that he has is much longer in the source material, and in the show they have Brie question Jamie whether or not he should be doing this with them given his age. I really loved this conversation that Jamie has with Aiden, who is the oldest of the boys, how he uses this as such an important teaching moment for him, given his age, given what has happened. And I think Jamie also identifies that this would be a very unique opportunity for them to give Aiden a type of peace that he might not be able to find otherwise. Having Brianna question that also reaffirms to us that she is in a different headspace here. She thinks he's too young to be going with them, and Jamie quickly overrules her. Brianna has not been back in this time long, but her view of things is definitely future forward, and Jamie is reminding her that in this time, this is how this is meant to go. Back inside, we get a continuation of the scene between Claire and Elspeth Cunningham, and we get a moment right out of the source material where Claire is watching her add salt to the water to stop her ghost from walking and send away sin. Claire argues that they can cover her face for the wake, but Elspeth says that they should tidy her up and that she should be buried with her face revealed so that her loved ones can have one last look upon it before she is buried. It's at that point that Elspeth reveals, "I've buried 3 husbands and 4 children myself. You always want to look upon their faces one last time, no matter what has happened to them." And in the book, Claire thinks Frank immediately, and that she'd looked at him and that was her last goodbye, and that she was glad that she had had the chance. And that is what reframes her positioning on it, and she decides that she can clean up Amy's face so that her family can look upon her face one last time as well. And that's when Claire asks her for her Christian name and she reveals that it is Elspeth. And the relationship dynamic between Claire and Elspeth is one of the more interesting ones in this book. So I'm really happy with who they cast to play her, because I think that in these early scenes, I really like the back and forth between the two of them, and that's going to be important as the story goes on. Back out on the hunt, we can hear a gunshot as all of the men and Brianna are traveling through the woods looking for the bear, and that is when we see them arrive at the bear and Captain Cunningham. There's a lot that gets moved around and rearranged for this entire scene with Amy and the aftermath when they all go out on the hunt for the bear. Interestingly, there are a whole bunch of people who are back at the big house in the surgery with Claire while everyone goes out on the hunt, including Jenny, who is in America in the book but is not in these scenes in the show. And when everyone is worried about Jamie going out and hunting the bear, she actually performs a blessing for a warrior going out. And that is actually the title of book 10 that is currently being written by Diana Gabaldon. This scene plays out very differently in the source material because Jamie actually shoots the bear and Ian is with them and shoots it with an arrow before it falls to the ground, and there's a pack of dogs that has joined the hunt as well that also aid in taking it down, including Jamie's dog Bluebell, which it doesn't seem like the show is going to include. And Aiden actually does get to go after the bear in the book, and Roger has to pull him off of the bear in the book. The show instead has Captain Cunningham be the one to evidently take down the bear all on his own. And again, it's great foreshadowing for him being a nefarious character, but it is a confusing change for people who have read the book and expected a scene where Jamie reaches into the bear's mouth and takes out a piece of Amy's bodice from his mouth to confirm that it is the bear that killed Amy Higgins. And by having Captain Cunningham be the one to take down the bear, it eliminates Aiden, and in this case Evan Lindsay, from feeling a part of Amy being avenged. This change is definitely on purpose for a narrative payoff that I think we're going to see in episode 4, and it definitely makes it clear for everybody who might not have picked up on it yet that there's something going on with Captain Cunningham, which is reaffirmed here with Jamie's facial expression and how he questions how he was able to take down the bear all on his own. Jamie and the viewer are meant to be suspicious of this, and I think that this was effectively shot to convey that. Back with William, we see him talking to Ben at his grave and saying that he cannot believe that it's come to this, and we can see a little piece of wood sticking up from the mud that's meant to mark his grave, and then when the camera angle changes, we get confirmation of that with the word gray etched into the wood. William starts to talk to Ben candidly about Amaranthus and Trevor and Henry, and he swears that his son will know his father's bravery before we cut back to Claire. And we get this really beautiful scene where she is talking to the bees and telling them about Amy and what has happened to her in the way that she's meant to talk to the bees, akin to the title of the book, and as we heard it explained in episode 1. She tells them all that she had accomplished while on the ridge, how she thrived, how she will be missed, and how her flowers still grow. And we see Claire place them on top of the hive, and she calls out that it's hollyhock before she turns around and walks back to the big house. We get this really beautiful up-close shot of the bees buzzing around in the grass to convey the passage of time before we cut back to Claire, who is in the kitchen, alongside Rachel and Brie, and they are trying to make sauerkraut as a remedy for Rachel, who is very clearly uncomfortable by how pregnant she is. And we see young Ian hovering around the door, keeping an eye on her, and she very quickly goes into labor all on her own. And again, they choose to go through this birth in a very quick and succinct manner, so we really don't see anything except for the conversation between young Ian and Claire outside of the surgery, which I think was a really beautiful and poignant one between the two of them, where he asks Claire to wrap the pelt around the baby if everything goes okay, and Claire reassures him by saying, no, you will do it yourself when the baby is born. Back at the American camp, William is approached by a soldier who claims he knew Benjamin and his condition had much improved, before he supposedly died, and he had thought Benjamin had conquered his fever prior to the day he was reported as dead. So William once again is suspicious about what has happened to his cousin. And this is when the opening sequence at the top of the episode and the flashback between William, Ben, and Henry is really important, because we see him go through his belongings and in his jacket look for the toy soldier that he had gifted him. William is following his instincts here, and a lot of things are seemingly amiss with Ben's disappearance and his death. And so trying to find this toy soldier is a way for him to confirm if he might have left the uniform and fled and kept the toy soldier on his person. So when he looks through the uniform and it's not amongst the belongings, you can see that William has this spark of hope within him. Back at the Ridge, we see that Rachel has given birth to Augie, and Ian has wrapped him in a pelt, and they're able to celebrate the birth all together in the surgery, including Fanny, who originally looks quite sad. And when Claire asks her what's wrong, she says no one was ever happy about a baby coming in the brothel, but Claire reaffirms her that this time it's different. I really loved this scene. I loved how it was shot, and I loved the discussion around the names, because that's one of the running jokes in the books about how they are never able to decide on a name for Augie, and Augie is what they had been referring to him as when Rachel was pregnant. And I really also appreciated that they mentioned Rollo again, because he's such a great character. It's a really sweet, light moment of the episode, especially just how happy young Ian looks. But the scene that follows is one of my favorites. And Jamie opens the scene by apologizing for not being there for the birth. So that implies that it was taking place during the hunt, and that is why Jamie was not present. Jamie then asks him if Augie is the name, and Ian confirms for now. And there's a funny joke about how he better work on that name. But Ian has this really beautiful line about how as soon as Claire put his son in his arms, everything has changed. The colors of the world changed around him, and he didn't have that moment with his other son, Swiftest of Lizards. So again, the show confirms that he is the father of that child, and he wishes that his own father could have been there to see him, even though Jamie has been like a second father to him his whole life. And he also hopes that his mom can meet him one day. And Jamie says that she'll be thrilled to meet him. So I'm still curious and optimistic that they will bring back the character of Jenny at some point, because she does go to America with them in the book and has a lot of involvement in the story actually later on. So I don't know what they'd be gaining by not including her. I'm also not sure if she needs to be there, but she has a lot to do if they bring her back. As young Ian expresses to Jamie just how much his involvement and role in his life has meant to him, he expresses back to Ian that he's actually jealous of him, because Jamie didn't get to do what Ian is about to do. And so even though Ian wants to ask him for advice, Jamie really doesn't have any, because by the time he met Bree, she was grown. He did not know Fergus as a baby. And even though he was able to be in proximity to William, he had to leave when he was still very young. The delivery of these lines is so beautiful, and he says he envies Ian for getting to see his son grow up. And I think as a watcher of this show and a reader of these books, this puts words to things that I think all of us who have followed Jamie in particular have been feeling for him. We all revel in the fact that we get to see him be a grandparent, because we never got to see him be a parent with his children in the time frame when they were so young. He missed all those formative years. And so I think he recognizes quite clearly how much of a gift that is for Ian, and he is able to congratulate him on that and encourage him in that endeavor, because it's one that Jamie really wishes that he could have had. I also think the framing of this shot is so beautiful, and the way that it ends is so nice with the two of them standing together with their arms around each other. We then cut to Claire, who's outside in the grounds picking mushrooms, and she is approached by a man on horseback. Some of you might recognize this actor if you've watched this show Sanditon. He's a Northern Irish actor, and he is a complete departure from his character of Arthur in that show here in this role as Benjamin Cleveland. When he asks after Jamie, Claire expresses to him that his business is her business, and she's asking who he might be. and she is blatantly ignored by him, and so she decides to tell him that he can find Jamie in the woodshed. This whole interaction is pulled right from the source material, and Claire can tell right away that something is amiss here. Jamie, we can see here, is making posts for stairs inside of his home when Benjamin Cleveland approaches him and introduces himself. And so we already know from the scene earlier on in the episode between Jamie and Roger who Benjamin Cleveland is, and that this is one of the men that is mentioned in Frank's book. As soon as he hears the name, Jamie registers that as well. He starts asking Jamie about his plans to rejoin the army. When Jamie reassures him the answer is no, and that's when Cleveland tells him about all of the men raising a militia to protect their families. Jamie at one point asks him about the men that were hung in the trees, and Cleveland admits that he had done that. I love all of the snips where we get these up-close shots of Jamie's hands as he's working and trying to continue to do that work, even though Benjamin Cleveland is encroaching on his personal space here. Same with this shot of him looking up at him over his glasses. And Cleveland is cool as a cucumber when he admits that those men were Tories and he hates a Tory. And that's when he warns Jamie that he has someone on his own land named Cunningham, who is also one. Jamie, for the most part, wants to keep control over Fraser's Ridge and not have anyone from outside of Fraser's Ridge start to have a say in what happens on his land. And we know that from previous seasons and why that would be. But Cleveland tells him they're over 100 strong now in his militia. And Jamie doubles down by saying he turned down George Washington himself. What would make Cleveland believe that he would change his mind for a man like him? He insists that he'll handle the captain himself and anything else that needs attention on his own land. But you can tell that there's an unsettling feeling over Jamie when he has this interaction with Cleveland and heeds his warning about Captain Cunningham, which kind of reaffirms Jamie's previous suspicions about him. I loved this casting. I thought that Cleveland came across exactly how he read in the book here. And Jamie plays it off in a way where you can tell there's something simmering under the surface here that's worrying him, and he's trying to concoct a way to handle it himself without getting this dangerous person involved. But he's also remembering the book and that he is supposedly going to fight alongside this person for whatever reason. When Roger approaches Jamie, he asks him, was that someone Frank had mentioned? And Jamie tells him yes. And so again, Jamie's trying to piece together how on earth he could end up fighting alongside Cleveland here. And so he's moving forward through the storyline, knowing the ending, but not completely understanding how and why he'd end up in that position. And that's really going to bend his mind. And you can see that starting to happen in this episode. And I think that Sam Heughan does a great job conveying that. And it does put Roger in this really unique situation where he has to team up with his father-in-law again. We've come a long way since season 4. Back inside, we can hear Claire getting a debrief on how the conversation went. And Jamie tells her that he'd better kill Cunningham because he's a danger to him. And that's now been confirmed. Roger then confirms that they plan to keep Lodge so that they can keep an eye on Cunningham. And he asks Jamie if Cunningham is mentioned in the book, and Jamie says no. The only name that Frank mentions in the battle is Jamie's, and that's when Claire gives Roger a look so that they can be alone. I love how Claire does this so subtly, and her and Roger's relationship is one that I've always really enjoyed, so I think this was a really nice moment to kind of reacquaint us with the fact that they have a good rapport and an understanding and an unspoken communication and language between them. When Roger leaves, Claire asks Jamie if he has told Roger that he dies in the book and that Frank says he dies. And Jamie says no, which Claire is happy about. We then get the conversation I was hoping for, which is how Claire had never spoke of Jamie when Frank was alive, and she never knew that Frank had been searching for him, found him, and then choose to keep that from her. Jamie understands that it was to keep Claire in his own time with him, and he surmises that maybe Frank wasn't looking for Jamie. He was actually searching for Claire to see if she'd leave him instead. It's another really wonderfully adapted scene from the story that I was really happy to see show up in some capacity in this season. And it's another opportunity for a visual callback here with another shot of the two of them and Jamie kissing Claire's knuckles like we've seen him do so many times over the course of these 8 seasons. And then as we move the plot along, Roger had just mentioned keeping tabs on Cunningham at Lodge, and we get to see our first glimpse of the Lodge meeting here. It's established that no one is allowed to bring weapons into Lodge here with this shot, and we very quickly see Captain Cunningham walking inside. Jamie and Roger have been waiting for him, and we can tell that the real purpose of this meeting is to get a better sense of what's going on with Captain Cunningham. And when Jamie introduces Lodge, he makes it clear that this is a meeting space where all of the men are meant to put aside their religious and political differences so that they can strengthen the ties that bind them together in service of the greater good at the Ridge. This is the face of a man who is up to no good, and you can tell instantly in this scene that something is going on with him. And Jamie knows. It's why he looks right at him as he says these very pointed lines. When Jamie's asked if Cunningham actually hunted the bear and killed it all by himself, he confirms it, but you can tell that he doesn't mean that wholeheartedly. And this is when Cunningham opens the meeting with his own words and starts by offering sympathy and support to Evan Lindsay and his family. So as Cunningham starts to hold court during Lodge, we can tell right away that this speech he's giving is very pointed and calculated by first offering his sympathy and support to Evan Lindsay after the death of his wife, Amy. And right away, we can tell that Roger and Jamie can sense that disingenuous approach here and are curious about where this speech might be going, especially when he brings up his son Simon and how he fought alongside him and saw him get shot and caught him, then felt him die in his arms. And within this big rousing speech, we know that he is fighting opposite Jamie in this scenario for the British and that he is a Tory. He tells everyone that his son had said he would see him again in 7 years. And this is to, again, tug at the heartstrings of everyone there after teeing up this conversation of Amy Higgins and the loss of Evan's wife and his 2 adopted sons' mother. In the book, this isn't happening in this setting. Everyone is actually going to Captain Cunningham's service where he is expected to speak, whereas here he's choosing to speak. And it takes place in their meeting house. And so a lot of other characters are listening to this exact speech take place in that scene in the book, whereas here it's being held at Lodge. And in a way that's done on purpose so that it's contained within all of these men and how we can later see how Cunningham is leveraging that room in a way that right now is not clear to everybody. In the book, Roger and Bree are actually going back and forth on whether or not they should attend the service because Roger doesn't want it to come across as him checking out the competition, as it were, because Roger is also a preacher. But Bree points out that Jamie doesn't like things happening on the ridge behind his back, so to speak. So they're both curious about what he is going to say. And Bree acknowledges that if they weren't to go, they would stick out like a sore thumb because everybody on the ridge was planning on going to Cunningham's service, including Jamie and Claire. So in the book, a lot more people on the ridge are listening to these words than in this scene in the show, including Captain Cunningham's mother, Elspeth. And in that sermon, he says to the congregation that 2 years ago he had received a call from God, and he's endeavoring to answer that call to the best of his ability, and that he wants to tell everyone more about his journey towards God and encourage everyone else to join him on that. In the book, he actually sings as well, and as soon as he starts to speak to the congregation about his time on His Majesty's ship, the HMS Lennox, Roger feels instant weariness, and he says it spread through him and the room like low-lying fog, because Roger knew that some of the people present were likely to be secret loyalists. But a lot of the people on the ridge had called themselves rebels, mainly because of their landlord, Jamie, who was sitting in the 3rd row of this sermon in the book. Another difference here is that in the book, he's referring to being in the Navy, whereas in the show, they're talking about him being at Saratoga on land against Jamie. In the show, he talks about catching his son in his arms and having to watch him die in his arms. But in the book, he had been patrolling the coast of Rhode Island when they encountered and pursued rebels, and his son was killed in that action. He did still catch him in his arms after he was struck, and he claims he felt him die. And when he calls out that he felt him die, he repeats it twice and then says, "Some of you will know that feeling," knowing that many of them did. This is important because, again, in the show, they're mirroring that here by showing an up-close shot of Evan Lindsay. I think the way that this was shot is so brilliant because, again, the actor who plays Captain Cunningham is a really wonderful actor, and you can see so much conveyed through his facial expressions and his eyes because something sinister is lurking underneath the surface of this face. Everything he's saying is very pointed, and he has an ulterior motive here to try and sway some of the men in this room to connect with him on a deeper level, and he's doing that through the loss of their loved ones. I especially love this shot because you can just get a sense of how he's trying to control and sway this room and these men, and how important that would be for him given his plan, which book readers already know. The message he conveys about seeing his son again in 7 years is really important because Jamie picks up instantly in the subtext of that. A lot of the men in the room are believers to the point where they will have understood that this prophecy that Cunningham is stating happened would be real. And in the book, a lot of them murmur and gasp. And Roger in the book is shocked to find that he had been following Cunningham through every word, totally absorbed, filled with sorrow, pride, warmth, uplifted, and then also purely emotional over aspects of his sermon. And in the book, Roger actually has to follow that sermon up himself with one of his own. Instead, we get this scene where we can see Jamie and Roger kind of collecting themselves in the aftermath of listening to that. And Jamie instantly recognizes the danger in a man who doesn't believe he can die. Jamie can understand the true nature of his words there. And again, I think this is really beautiful foreshadowing for what's to come with Captain Cunningham's character. Back with William, we see him sleeping inside of a tent, still at the camp in New Jersey, and we watch him venture outside to the grave, and he begins to dig it up. I remember reading this in the book and having a very clear visual of what it looked like, and the way this is shot is very on par with what I had been envisioning myself. As William is sledging through the mud, he uncovers the face of the man buried in that shallow grave, and he instantly can tell that it is not Benjamin. And again, because we got the scene at the very beginning of the episode where we got to set our eyes on the actor playing Benjamin, we too can see right away that this person is not him. Now, William has confirmation that his cousin is lost, but still alive. And that's a very real and impactful one for him that will set him off on a really interesting storyline, and also will tee up a lot of questions for people who haven't read the books yet. Back at the big house, we can see that Jamie is continuing to read Frank's book and hear Frank's voice talking to him as he's trying to figure out what's going on with Captain Cunningham. Frank confirms that Cunningham is not the only one who knows the day of his death. And Jamie, understandably, is very spooked by those words. And Claire is asleep beside him when he calls to her. And he puts this book down and mulls over all of these thoughts floating around in his head, trying to piece together what all of this could mean. Because again, Jamie is very much convinced that Frank is speaking to him through this book. And he feels that way almost all the way through the entire source material. We can see that in this moment where he feels so lost, he calls upon Claire for connection. And the way that this is shot is nearly identical to the shot that we got in season 5. But Jamie is very intentional here, and this moment between them doesn't last long. We can hear Frank's voice at the end of this scene, and the page is open on his bedside table so that we are able to both hear and read the line, and the chapter end where we can see with James Fraser among the fallen, referring to the battle at King's Mountain. On this page, we can see the words close quarters combat, swift and fierce battle, 190 loyalist militiamen, including a man named Ferguson. The rebels only suffered minimal losses, only 28, but they lost one of their senior officers, with James Fraser among the fallen. I really loved how this was shot and how Claire is unaware of what Jamie's going through, because it showcases how he's going to try and shield her from a lot of that. And then we see him look over at the book, the open page on his bedside table, just as we hear Frank's voice say, "You're going to die. Who will hold her once you're gone?" And we get this really intense shot of Jamie's face with his brow furrowed and Claire sleeping on his chest before the episode fades to black. I loved the ending. I think it's great foreshadowing for what Jamie's going to be grappling with this season. And I thought Caitriona Balfe did a really brilliant job directing this episode. I loved all of her creative choices, the camera blocking, the pacing. I thought this was a really well executed episode for someone who is making their directorial debut. And it tees up episode 3 really brilliantly, which is so far my favorite of this season. So much pulled directly from the source material, some new changes and edits, but all of them seem to be pushing the plot along. As always, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for listening and chatting about the show with me. I look forward to the next Outlander breakdown episode, where we talk about my favorite episode so far of season 8, which is episode 3. We'll chat soon.